I think about how the sacred is an emergency and being an interruption in scheduled programming. It's like an inconvenience. It's a category violation.
So I think of the sacred as the amniotic incompleteness of things. The idea that the world is never fully capturable, never fully legible or intelligible. And that this idea that the sacred is fugitive, maybe God's whispers, when we expect the thunder and the lightning at the top of the mountain, that somewhere within this tenuous, creaturely, fragile path that we're making through the world together, the sacred is at the very tip of this lichenizing pathway that we are making together.
Welcome to All That We Are. We have a special episode for you today, which I will come back to later. First of all, for those of you in London, we have an in-person event happening next week. It's a small, intimate dinner for 30 people where we will share stories, songs, and poetry, and of course, really delicious food. You can find the link to get your tickets on the events page at www.allthatweare.org. And whilst you're there, you will find our brand newly designed website, which I made last week when I was recovering from COVID and just had a nice day of reorganizing the website and making it way more beautiful and easy to use. And so please go and check that out. But when you're there at the events page, you'll find information about our new learning journey from me to we. This is going to be an incredibly powerful journey with 19 guest facilitators through 6 weeks as we explore some of the most important questions of our time. The speaker sessions are accompanied by embodiment sessions and discussion salons. It's going to be an incredibly special experience, and the early bird price ends on Monday. So if you're going to join, it makes sense to do so in the next day or two. If you go to the page about From Me to We, you can read all about it and read the different questions that we're going to be answering together as a group. And the group includes all the facilitators and all of you that are going to take part. There are 6 weeks and 6 different themes. These are dismantling New Age spirituality, the expanded we are all entangled, collective dharma, engaged activism, and embodying all that we are. And if you go there, you can read, there's 2 questions for each theme. And we've also shared some general words around why we are going on this particular inquiry at this time. So please do join us for From Me to We, which starts on the 2nd of May. And you can join from all over the world. The sessions will all be recorded, and the embodiment speaker sessions and salons are at different times. And we've tried to make it so that some of them are easier for certain time zones, but all of them are accessible for a lot of time zones. So we really, really hope that you can join us for From Me to We. Now to our conversation today. This was made in partnership with the Reimagining Education Conference, which invites new connections and deepening relationships that will transform higher education within and beyond academia. The Reimagining Education Conference is hosted by the Ecoversities Alliance, which you may know from our episode with Manish Jain. And it's with learners and communities from a polarity of worldviews, backgrounds, and experiences. The conference that took place in February was asking the question, how do we reframe and sustain learning environments that honor diverse knowledge ecologies and cosmologies in a rapidly changing world? This was the second in the Reimagining Education Conferences, and I was lucky to be a speaker at the first one, as well as at this one where I hosted this session. I want to offer a thank you to Daniel Rudolph, who I collaborated with on this. We recorded this conversation on February the 25th. It was actually meant to be a panel discussion with 4 speakers, but 2 of the speakers couldn't make it on the day. Instead, what happened was we were led into what feels like another dimension as Bayo and Sophie converse together in the very special and unique way that comes from this particular togetherness of these 2 consciousnesses. Bayo Akomolafe, who you know from this podcast, he's been on a couple of episodes now, is a poet, philosopher, psychologist, professor, and chief curator of the Emergence Network. He curates this earth-wide project for the recalibration of our ability to respond to civilisational crisis a project framed within a feminist ethos and inspired by indigenous cosmologies. Bayo has authored books such as These Wilds Beyond Our Fences, Letters to My Daughter on Humanity's Search for Home, and co-authored We Will Tell Our Own Story, The Lions of Africa Speak. Bayo hopes to inspire a diffractive network of sharing, a slowing down, an ethics of entanglement, an activism of inquiry, a politics of surprise, one that does not treat the crises of our times as exterior to us, or the solutions that conventional activism offers as discrete or separate from the problems that we seek to nullify. He is currently hosting a course, We Will Dance with Mountains, Let Us Make Sanctuary, a ceremonial inquiry, collective sense-making, and prophetic exile, where we might unlearn mastery, become fugitive, and slow down in times of urgency. Sophie Strand is a writer based in the Hudson Valley who focuses on the intersection of spirituality, storytelling, and ecology. But it would probably be more authentic to call her a neo-troubadour animist, with a propensity to spin yarns that inevitably turn into love stories. Give her a salamander and a stone, and she'll write you a love story. Sophie was raised by house cats, puffballs, possums, raccoons, and an opinionated, crippled goose. In every neighborhood she's ever lived in, she's been known as the walker. She believes strongly that all thinking happens interstitially, between beings, ideas, differences, mythical gradients. Her first book of essays, The Flowering Wand, Lunar Kings, Lichenized Lovers, Transspecies Magicians, and Rhizomatic Harpists, Heal the Masculine, is forthcoming in 2022 from Inner Traditions. Her eco-feminist historical fiction reimagining of the Gospels, The Madonna Secret, will also be published by Inner Traditions. Her books of poetry include Love Song to a Blue God, and Those Other Flowers to Come, and The Approach. Her poems and essays have been published by Art Papers, The Dark Mountain Project, Poetry.org, Unearthed, Braided Ways, Creatrix, Your Impossible Voice, The Doris, Persephone's Daughters, and Entropy. She has recently finished a work of historical fiction, The Madonna Secret, that offers an eco-feminist revision of the Gospels. She is currently researching her next epic, a mytho-poetic exploration of ecology and queerness in the medieval legend of Tristan and Isolde. And so there you go. Those are our two speakers that we are in conversation with today. And I'm sure that just listening to those biographies makes you want to A, get out a dictionary, and B, rewrite your biography with a lot more humanity, poetry, and purpose. In this conversation entitled Researching the Sacred, we explore the themes of reimagined education, cybernetic flow, and bewilderment, where we speak to the question, how can we reimagine and reorient our curiosity during civilisational crisis? I hope that you enjoy this conversation, and I do warn you that you may have to listen to this one many times to find your way into this particular portal of intellect and consciousness. Welcome to All That We Are, with me, your host, Amisha Gadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between activism, the sacred, creativity, and regeneration, the spaces where our inner and outer worlds dance. From healing trauma to nature connection, to new technologies to ancient wisdom, it's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a more beautiful future. Despite the challenges we face as a global community or the pressures we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to listen, to ask ourselves the big questions, and to share what we are already doing and envisioning, we create the futures of our wildest dreams. And we begin to embody all that we are becoming, and all that is possible. Welcome, Sophie and Bayo, and welcome to everybody else that is here with us today. The first question that we're going to explore within this theme of researching the sacred is very simply, what is the sacred? I would like to invite each of you to share some reflections on how you would define or how you understand the sacred. Sophie, should we start with you?
Sure. And thank you so much for having me here. I'm honored to be included in this ecosystem. Everyone who's shown up, everyone who was invited, everyone who by their absence also brings us like a magnet into shape. So when I found out about the title of this conversation, I immediately was a little prickled, which is always kind of a good sign, because I can't quite connect with an epistemology framed around our agency, our active search or quest or inquiry into the sacred. The sacred is that to be grasped, to be accumulated, to be understood. How can I pin it down or find it? And I was thinking that, at least in my own situated experience, my approach to the sacred would be to flip the paradigm and to ask, what if the sacred researches you? What does it mean to let your body be the site of multi-species collaboration that does not necessarily contribute to your own aliveness? What does it mean to look at your haunted nervous system, your non-neuronormativity, your illness, your decay and rot as an investigation in process? I think of the sacred as being an interruption in scheduled programming. It's like an inconvenience. It's a category violation. My favorite quote is by this philosopher Gaston Bachelard, and he says, "Wolves and shells are crueler than stray ones." And I think that the sacred plays by a similar set of rules, which is not rules. Gods with animal heads are more sacred than human ones. I write a lot about Second Temple period Palestine and folkloric oral Judaism, and how it was structured around interpreting texts communally, reinterpreting these things in an adaptive, unfolding way. And I'm particularly interested in how Jesus both walked into that ritual practice and also interrupted it, in that his parables they didn't fit into the expected traditional roles of myth and storytelling in scripture at the time period. His parables were intentionally combative. Saying the mustard seed is like the kingdom to Galilean farmers is like saying that it's like the invasive species that's taking down your agricultural profits that are keeping your family alive as the kingdom, and it's present right now. His approach to the sacred was to create a container where interruption happens, where people are constantly butting in on each other. The sacred is always a rupture. It's always a leakage. And as someone with a body that is not a unity, where I have connective tissue, where, my joints sublux, it's those places of friction, those places where I do rupture, where I do leak, that I feel myself being investigated by the sacred. So that's my a very initial kind of massaging of that. I'd love to hear what you think of it too, Amisha.
Thank you, Sophie. I feel we're going to go very far off the script of research in this conversation. Yeah, let's see how we flow with this. For me, the sacred, it's something that's both soft and powerful. It's something that I don't know if I have ever or would ever try and put into words. It's the presence that you can't describe. It's the unseen that's always there dancing with us. It's the how things seem to move and dance and play in ways that are always surprising and arresting somehow. Yeah, somehow beyond words. But here we are using our words. Bayo, what's alive for you today around this definition, this what is the sacred?
First is my exhaustion with politics as usual, and that I vote for Sophie Strand. I vote for Sophie Strand. Good to see you, sister.
Good to see you too. I vote for you, Bayo. I think you're pretty sacred. I think we're all sacred, but thank you.
It's good to finally be in conversation with Sophie and you again, Amisha. And I greet everyone. Yeah, I started with exhaustion. The images streaming through the screen of Ukrainians fighting, trying to chase back a tyrant. They're upsetting. They're scary images. And so there's talk in the air of World War III. It just feels we're in bizarre times. And so during these moments, I often turn to poetry, to write and to read. I read one from W.H. Auden. It's called September 1st, or September 1, 1939. That's the name of the poem. I would invite you to read it. It's the mark of World War II when it began. And he writes, waves of anger and fear circulate over the bright and darkened landscapes of the earth, obsessing our private lives. It feels that the sense of privacy that modern civilization offered us as its citizens is hollowing out. And we're no longer as private or as situated or as grounded as this enterprise would have us believe we are. So I feel that Ukraine isn't as far away as we think, and that this arrangement of peace that the global nation-state order is premised upon, that came to us at the end of 1945 when World War II ended, I think it has been a war all along, that peace has been masquerading, or war has been masquerading as peace, this tense and fragile peace. But what has all this got to do with the sacred? For me, the sacred is this tense in-between, this in-betweenness of things, this incompleteness of things that can stay within the prospects and the smell and the whiff of war, and at the same time sense of forlorn hope, that there is something yet to come, that there is emancipation, freedom, possibly a glimpse of a different kind of peace that might yet be, even in the midst, in the womb of the slave ship, even in the midst of this war that is rolling out. So I think of the sacred as the amniotic incompleteness of things, the idea that the world is never fully capturable, never fully legible or intelligible, and that this idea that the sacred is fugitive, maybe God's whispers, when we expect the thunder and the lightning at the top of the mountain, Mount Sinai, this idea that the small and the indescribably little, the critters around us. Sophie speaks a lot about the microbial and the mycorrhizal and the rhizomatic, that somewhere within this tenuous, creaturely, fragile path that we're making through the world together, the sacred is at the very tip of this lichenizing pathway that we are making together. And maybe that gives me my greatest sense of hope, even as I feel the tremor from Ukraine, that we will not be fully captured, no matter the fascist arrangements that spring from this machine that we call capitalism or modernity, that we will not be fully identified, that I have a right to opacity, that I will not be fully named. And therein lies the sense of the sacred I'm in touch with right now.
Thanks, Bayo. There's a question here to bring the conversation into the space of education, to understand how each of you are researching the sacred in your work, in your writing, in your being, and also how that relates to the ways in which the sacred is discussed or has been discussed and researched within academia. So we can just get a sense of where we're coming from and where we're going, and if there's anything that is shifting and opening there, and if academia is the place for this research, or if you're finding it in other ways.
Sure. And also just want to say thank you, Bayo, for bringing up that concept that you as such a spokesperson for Karen Barad definitely have more intimacy with than me, which is that there's no exclusion zone. There's so much worry right now about Chernobyl, but the truth is that, just as we're worried that radioactive material will drift from Chernobyl to us, wherever we are, so are we immediately culpable and entangled with everything that's happening right now, even though we're, flattened into these tiny little people on screens, when the truth is that we are teeming holobionts of bacteria. We can't name that with our image. We can't become a glyph for that. It's impossible. there's a glitch. You talk about glitches too that keeps us from fully representing our microbial mysticism and our culpability. So thank you for grounding me. Poems are very good medicine because they don't actually pretend to be medicine. They're like, I'm probably not going to help you.
And therein lies the medicine, right?
Yes, exactly. Amisha, thank you for asking about the more practical approach. And the truth is that I love academia, and there's a part of me that loves to win and to learn and to accumulate knowledge. I love creating reading lists and watching lectures and feeling like I'm achieving something. But the truth is that I am dying. I have a terminal illness that has no cure. And the main way I research is by being curious and attentive to my breakdown. And the truth is, I think if I hadn't gotten so ill, I would have gone through a straight academic process. But by virtue of complicated improvisational emergencies that have arrived inside of my body, my research has had to be anarchic. I've had to be in cahoots with animals and with fungi and with medicines that don't work and with accidents and with infections. And so my research, yes, I love to read primary texts and to go down a rabbit hole, to follow my love like a North Star, like moss on the north side of the tree, to see where my love takes me. But also most practically, I need to pay attention to the ways in which I am falling apart. For example, we're so interested in our own individual aliveness that we forget that our wounding is a portal, is a silhouette that shows us, it directs us out of the human, out of the anthropocentric story. And when I found out that I had connective tissue disease, I realized that my love of fungi was deeply wedded to that. And that if I couldn't fix myself, I could I could devote myself to the connective tissue of the soil, to mycorrhizal systems. That maybe there's not a cure for me, but my illness could be a kind of orientation towards an entanglement with something else, with another species. So my answer is, I have lots of exercises. I offer most of my work for free. I have lots of exercises about researching your relationship to your more than human kin and opening up those sensory portals. And so I offer those. But if I'm being totally honest, I'm really interested in the way that disabled bodies, terminally ill bodies, abused bodies have become geographies of the sacred and places where breakdown has a lot to teach us. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sophie, for sharing with us and for the way in which you're honoring your own experience in a greater collective understanding. Can you share with us a bit more around how you have, in your own journey, found a way to honor the sacred with this condition that you're living with, and with what moves you within nature?
So I've had a lot of events where I've gone into cardiac arrest or anaphylaxis or been so sick that it's like a bottleneck effect, which are these extinction events. There's some climatological pressure whereby most of the species don't make it. But the species that do, this slender offering of species, then boom out to create biodiversity again. But what you can see are these winnowing moments where only a couple of species get through and get to reproduce and repopulate the earth. And so I've thought of these events in my life as being these bottleneck events, as actually showing me that the only thing there is the sacred. And the sacred is being closer to Garcia Lorque's duende than anything else. Duende being goblin, being dancing in the wound, being this propulsive energy that is creating biodiversity even after extinction events. But maybe it's not the survival of the human. For me, the sacred is really held and nourished by deep time and by this understanding that evolution is not a climactic experience. There was no last ape and first human. Where do you draw that distinction? There's no first Sophie and last Sophie. I'm on the way to becoming something, and I should probably be curious about what it is. And I think that when I talk to people who've known extraordinary violence or illness, they have similar experiences, which is when you're paralyzed, when you're in bed, when you think that every second might be your last, just a dust mote in the air becomes like God's eye. I'm not pretending like I took that knowledge with me forward after the first time it happened. I am hard to teach. I am stubborn, and I am, hard to mark, hard to evolve. So it took many, many times for me, many, many bottlenecks for me to realize that the only thing bringing me through was that effervescent, anarchic quality of life, liveliness, non-human liveliness.
Thank you, Sophie. Bayo, what do you want to share from what Sophie has shared, and also this question around academia and research?
What's the question about research, Amisha?
Well, there's a question of trying to kind of understand, like, how do you research the sacred, and what does that mean to research the sacred, and can that happen? Does that happen in an academic setting, or does it not? Yeah, whatever is alive for you around that.
I don't know, but I feel that researching the sacred is what I did for most of my life, and I really don't want to do that any longer. But what I hear in researching the sacred, especially when I take into consideration my Christocentric upbringing, always postponed the sacred. That the sacred was at the end of the street, down the highway, and if I did my work well enough, I would, in the by and by, arrive and taste of the sacred. I'm much more given to the idea that research is sacred than to think that I will eventually arrive at it. I want a sense that when my daughter goes into the toilet and asks me to come help her with washing her hands, or when I'm helping Kea with unzipping his pants so he can go to the toilet, that's a form of research. That's a form of coming to terms with the doability and undoability of a world that exceeds our imaginations. I want to have a sense that that even modernity is a yearning, a reaching out, a question, a sort of inquiry that might be tethered to, you might say, the archetype of Baldur, the Norse god, who is quarantined and in lockdown because his mother, Freya, does not want to see him hurt. And so modernity is asking the question and researching thereby, how do I protect the citizen, the individual? How do I coddle and flatten the space so that it's hyper-rational and entirely available for description, explanation, prediction, and control? And I want to also feel that research counters research, that the sacred is not just some holistic core. It's not just some entitlable, intelligible notion like justice or love or compassion, that the sacred is yet to come, and that sometimes we are infatuated with images. And I think this is what the academic world is. At least this is one of the critiques that I'm given to, that we have become, so to speak, and I speak with a royal we here because there's no monolithic thing called the academic world, but it seems we have become an economy unto itself, so that it's easy nowadays to even speak about entanglement and ecology and feminist new materialisms and how to live in a world and thrive in it, as long as it gives me a tenured position, as long as it pushes me up the ladder. But it has nothing to do with living and breathing and being swayed by things that exceed me. I feel maybe these times call for a different sense of research, a pedestrian sense of research, a more than human sense of research that takes it away from its humanist clause and allows furniture to do research, and allows for the fact that the weather is doing research with our bodies, and that we are weathering bodies, and that these times are prolific with different forms of indeterminate research, even though that term itself sounds clinical and sterile.
Yeah, I just love the animist reorientation of research, the agency, the agential quality of particles and matter in investigating and changing. Something I've been thinking a lot about is about how our very bodies are experiments and investigations into past ecosystems. That evolution happens so slowly over so many thousands of generations that by the time we exist as matter, we're already these fossils of lost places and lost relationships, that our hands were developed for grasping trees, our eyes were developed in the Cambrian age in water to see beings that are now extinct. We are the tools of research, but it's research that's happening at a scale that we can hardly even comprehend. And I've been thinking lately about how I'm part of an experiment. and I'm already a failed component of it. And that failure actually takes me off the hook. I'm very inspired by the ways you work with failure, Bayo. So that's definitely informed by you. Thank you.
Sophie, remember one of our conversations, this is one of our conspiratorial sharings. You shared with me the neuroparasitological phenomenon of the fungal entity that,
yeah.
right?
Ophiocordyceps unilateralis.
Ophio unilateralis that captures the ant through sporulation and then leads the ant astray so that it bites down on some leaf and dies. And that becomes some kind of, extension of that fungal pathogen, right?
Yeah.
That has taken me to multiple rabbit holes, not just to see how it affects ants, but how it affects humans as well. That we all are swayed. We are oriented bodies. We're not as erect as we think we are. This is the myth, the hidden codicil of modern civilization, that I stand erect, that my brother here, even, and Aaron, who's here as well, stands erect, independent, resolute, but that we are oriented and moved and instigated and motivated and part of things that are larger than us disturbs the idea that I'm the researcher and I'm answering my own questions. Then it becomes an invitation to stay with the trouble, that even the ways we ask questions, even the way we desire, even the ways we want, even the ways we articulate hope and think about the future are computational, algorithmic, beyond us, cybernetic flows beyond us. And that is shocking, scary, and hopeful all at once.
Yeah. Oh, man. I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot in terms of emergence and about how you can't plan for emergence. And that in terms of a lot of the climatological things we're predicting, we probably don't actually understand what's going to happen. That the very nature of complexity is that you can't game it and that we're just a part of it. I've been thinking about how the sacred is an emergency and an emergence, and that we jump levels of complex organization, not because we think our way through complexity, but that we relax into the morphological component of these coalescing patterns. Like, how can we feel ourselves as part of a pattern and less part of matter? And, it's a very process philosophy. How can we feel like we're doorways for matter that's flowing through us? I mean, I love academia. I very much understand the ways it can contain, life is containment. It is lipid cells that contain life briefly, but then it has to rupture in order to reproduce. And so I think academia needs to cultivate rupture a little bit in order to create those emergent systems that help us to improvisationally work with these larger stories.
And maybe this is where play comes in, right? This is where the playful disruption of a child bursting into the room. Because planning for rupture also feels like part of the program.
Yeah, I know, exactly. It's like certain kind of breakout rooms or things that happen. Yeah, you can't actually do that.
I think we can only midwife soft membranes, if you will. We can gather around a crack and do something with it that isn't a patching up of the crack. We can lean into the monstrosity of a new ethnography, right? That's springs from a crack, that springs from failure. For instance, how do we respond to these moments when children are locked up in their homes? What does education mean at this point in time? EJ is my wife, and she was asked this question by two national dailies here in India. And they were like, so how do you control your kids? How do you keep them busy? And she was like, because this is public knowledge, I think, for many people, that my kids haven't gone to school. And she was like, my problem is how to keep them less prolific. It's not how to keep them busy. It's how to tame them down. That's what I like to know. I think we're overwhelmed, and I like to say diawhelmed, right? We're diagonally influenced by things that are too hard, too powerful for us to contain. And maybe attracting community around disability, the disability of these moments, is the kind of research and education that I'm deeply interested in.
I love the summoning of disability around the cracks, and as disability also being a kind of a rupture in the body, a crack in the body.
Descent of the human, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And I've been thinking lately that we think of our very cells of symbiogenesis as being this kind of indigestion, this anarchic lovemaking of two beings that don't completely digest each other or eat each other, but create a new cell. That disability is this kind of opening to those incursions that create ecological novelty. Our disabled bodies, our cracks, are the invitation to create more complex monsters, as you often summon. And that perhaps what we really need to do are create more Frankensteins right now, allow ourselves to become a limb rather than a mind.
Yes, that disability is never fully owned by the bodies that it's attached to. That disability is already irretrievably communal.
Beautiful, yeah.
There's a sense in which my son, who is on the spectrum, it's not his disability. That's a property-minded capitalist notion of the body, right? He doesn't own it. It's more an intensity of the field. It's more relational. So when he has his so-called meltdowns, which my discipline is, I'm required by my contractual obligation to my disciplines of psychology to say it is, which I don't subscribe to. When he has a meltdown, so to speak, it's not just his meltdown. It's an intensity of the field. It moves me in different ways. It tracks me to different things. It's a different cartography altogether. And I think that is the opportunity. Those places of failure, those places of openings are education of a different post-humanist, animist kind. The Strandian, Sophie Strandian notion of education, we need to say.
We are taking just a short pause here. If you are enjoying this episode, please consider joining our community. For a small contribution, you can be part of our beautiful online world, where we deepen the conversation and offer spaces of learning and practice. As a member, you are a patron supporting the making of this show, and you receive a number of benefits, such as special member-only events and discounts on all our courses, retreats, and in-person experiences. You will have membership to our app and connect with inspiring humans around the world through a social network to discuss the themes of the show away from the eyes of advertisers and the manipulation of big tech. Our membership is what makes us able to stay advertising free in a world that is always trying to sell us stuff we don't need. And it is the very heart of all that we are. Head to www.allthatweare.org/support to find out more. Questions around academia are coming from, this setting of reimagining education. As this conversation is shared wider outside of this setting and in the context of the All That We Are community, where many people in that community listening, like me, have been out of a formal educational setting for longer than they were in one, and maybe were quite disengaged in the ones that they were in. There's a kind of a sort of glaze over that can sort of sometimes happen around the academic conversations, and yet such a hunger for knowledge and such a curiosity for understanding this depth of life in all the ways that we can. So with that, I wonder what you both can share separately and then together. Feel very free to continue in that way around how we can really live the sacred or live in that. And researching isn't the right word, but live in that curiosity and in that open, dynamic relationship with what is sacred, and how we do that in and amongst both those moments of our child's meltdowns and, the day-to-day experiences that we have, and also within the bigger frame of, for example, what we may be feeling, or what, as we are, for most of us here, watching the pictures of what's happening in the Ukraine, for example, but obviously knowing that other brothers and sisters around the world are having a very different experience of that.
I mean, I think a lot about improvisation and comedy, and how when you go onto the stage with other people, you want to make the most interesting choice, not the right or the wrong choice. And so you evaluate everything you do in your life as being like, what's the choice that I'll make that will provide the most opportunity for relationship and change and risk me being changed? And so I think that it's an interesting way to go about your life, which is every decision is an opportunity to risk being changed and to risk doing the most interesting thing. And just as Bayo said, that doesn't exist in some kind of sanctified church, some realm. It happens when you're going into the washroom to help your child. It happens when you're making your coffee in the morning and you decide that it's your sacred soma and that you're going to have a psychedelic experience by drinking this coffee. You know, there's a lot of, I'm a little worried right now by the psychedelic renaissance and this idea that everything you take is a medicine. Like, what does it mean to be the medicine? If you look at your senses and the way that we've gated them down culturally, if you open up your sensory portals, your body is psychedelic. So that's something I really offer, which is the body is psychedelic. You do not need to take another pill to become ecologically awake. And in fact, if you have to extract and take something to become awake, you're just rearticulating the problem, which is extractive. And so I think for me, in a day-to-day way, it's about realizing that everything you do is haptic. Haptic is the Greek for touch and to fasten. Everything you do touches and also enchains you. It was so interesting at the beginning, which is you said, like, let's leave everything behind before we enter here, which I think is an incredible way of creating a ritual sacred realm. But the truth is we are sedimented with everything, that we are flavored and salted by everything that comes through us, whether we, as Bayo say, see it or diagonally inflects itself upon us. And so I think it's about opening up to all of those ways that our senses allow us to be penetrated, sedimented, and changed, and to sometimes risk opening those doorways up even wider. But yeah, I would really love to hear. I feel like Bayo's going to have a much better answer than me. I felt a little stumped by that one, I'll be honest.
Nope.
I enjoyed the frame of the most interesting that you shared. And I feel like that's, obviously that's subjective as to what is interesting, but to ask oneself in all the small moments and all the big moments, like, what is the most interesting choice here?
This feels like a question of placemaking for me. How we make home, how we ritualize the everyday, what choices are available. I hardly ever use that word choice. Maybe it's my repudiation of my upbringing, which I'm still connected to, even though I pretend abandonment sometimes. But choice, how we choose and how we desire. And I feel attracted to the story of, and I tell this all the time, but it needs to be told more often, during my quest to decolonize myself, as if that were an exclusive journey, a linearity through being colonized and arriving at some wokeness. I asked a question. I said, if our gods, Eshu, Obatala, Orunmila, if these orishas, the Yoruba cosmology, the Yoruba mythology, if it's real, if our gods are powerful, then why didn't they do anything about those people who came in ships and took millions of us away? Why didn't they do anything about that? Some of the writers that I deeply respect and elders from our place responded with story and would tell the story of the god of victory or the god of war, Ogun, mounting up an insurgency against the slavers and rushing to the beach with an army and being met on the way by his brother, Eshu. Eshu comes and drugs his brother and goes and puts him to sleep, and then does the seemingly hateful and insidious thing of traveling with the slaves, not stopping the whole enterprise, but actually perpetuating it by traveling up and down the Atlantic with the slaves. And I didn't understand this idea. And so another question was born then, because the first question wasn't fully articulated or fully answered. So what is more powerful than power? And it seems the streams and flows, virtual and dreamlike, are teaching me that what's more powerful than power is ecstasy, because power is a form of containment, is a form of colonization. It's an image. It's building an image It's restoring an image. It's how we take care of ourselves within an image, within a sense of the familiar. But it is often the case that the familiar becomes toxic and we need to travel. So Sophie's speaking about ruptures, right? Breaking through lipid cells and looking for other transmutational boundaries to explore and differences. It seems to me that the question you ask, Amisha, is really about how we travel and how we hold each other in this traveling, how we hold each other in this time of uncertainty, of rupture, of deep and troubling failure and dizziness. I must throw in dizziness there. I spoke with a group yesterday and they spoke about pandemic dizziness, that people are falling over. It almost reminds me of the origins of trauma in 19th century Europe, when people started to fall over and they called it railway spine. It seems we're back there again at this precipice of things. And we're being invited to make place and make room in different ways. Maybe that's why we're giving ourselves 6 feet between, because something needs to come between. Something needs to be allowed into our ritualized ways of conditioning ourselves to be individuals. Something else needs to be born. And I don't know that any of us can fully articulate this moment. All we can do, I think, is to lean in with deep humility. Our practice must be to unlearn mastery. Our practice must be to tell stories, to rejuvenate archives, pedagogies that help us sit here, not pedagogies that rush us into blueprints of the future, that teach us to haughtily pronounce what the next might look like, but that we cannot summarily, on our own accord, summon the sense of humility. One cannot be humble by one's own means. You have to be met and defeated over and over again. So we need pedagogies that help us become defeated and to stay in a sense of defeat or humility, where humus is a coming down to earth. I could give a keynote or write a book about this, but let me pass it on.
I just want to honor and say that I felt like that met me where I am today. And the truth is that I came into this meeting having been violently ill for 12 hours and having been in the doctor's office before that. And I come from not knowing how many defeats you can experience and keep going, but also knowing that my most interesting ideas have come from these abyss, these geothermal vents so deep under the ocean that you can't even imagine getting there with the equipment you might need. So thank you. I need to learn how to be defeated and not try and rush through it, because if I rush through it, it happens again.
Yes, feel you.
And to be perfectly honest and practical, my best ideas have happened lying on the bathroom floor when the fever breaks. Those are the moments where I feel like it's not that I don't have an ego, it's that my ego it becomes gelatinous. it suddenly breaks its mold. I mean, it's still corrupted and complicated. It's still present, but at least it can take a new shape. And I think defeat helps us to take new shapes, to learn. And, somatics tells us that in different shapes, we access different emotions, things we've repressed. And I think that defeat is a posture, really, when you think about supplication, being on the ground, putting your hands out in front of you, that is a somatic geometry. That is a space, a poetics of space we can inhabit where more interesting ideas might arrive. So thank you for helping to root me, to racinate me today, right now. And I think going to your question, which is why does this happen? I think about Job a lot in the story of Job, which is, I feel like in my life, I say, why is this happening? If you're real, if my sense of being in alignment or being in relationship with the sacred is real, why is this happening to me again and again? This feels unfair. And I have to realize that no, I can't understand what posture I'm being put into. I just have to fill the shape.
My sister, the story of Job is very central to my ongoing thesis and work and musings, and how to revisit that over and over again. Job crying out, I've led a life by the book. I shouldn't be in this place. I'm a good man. Why is this happening to me, right? And God answers in a way that would banish. If I were to answer as a psychologist, when I was a practicing psychotherapist, if I were to answer a client's questions that way, I would be delicensed, right? And God is like, yeah, have you seen Pleiades? Have you seen Orion? Or have you seen this Leviathan or Behemoth. So he seems to answer in a bewildering way, which has always, or for some time, inspired me to suggest that maybe something deeper than an answer to a question is bewilderment. And that what we rudely call reality, which is only a convenience of language, works by the mechanism of bewilderment, works by the mechanism of failure and defeat. And this is not to romanticize defeat as some magical Disney-esque Hollywoodized, thing where there's always a glimpse of tomorrow. No, that's not the idea. But that we live and are inhabited and inhabit categories. And those categories, like life forms, help us strive, help us build stabilities. And we need stabilities. We need these archetypal architectural structures to know the world in a certain way, to think about how to proceed, to care for those around us. The question is, the universe is too indeterminate, too promiscuous, too teenage to abide by a single form. It will keep on moving. Loss is its language, is the soundtrack of emergence. And so it seems stabilities need to give way to different other stabilities. And it is defeat, or what French philosopher Deleuze would call deterritorialization, that would invite a sense of the new or different differences. I've been leaning into xenoglossy. You guys may not have heard of it. Xenoglossy is the observed spontaneous acquisition of a new language by those who are autistic. I've read, this is not something that will make it into nature. If you know what I'm talking about, Sophie. This is just something that will make it into a reputable journal. But the idea that language itself is not human, we can even say with some sense of compassion and care that even if all Yoruba people were to die, God forbid, and there were no other speakers of the beautiful tongue of Yoruba, that Yoruba will still live in the morsels, in pheromones, in molecules, in ants and their communities. To find a way to be secreted by the other than human. Language is not just us. I'm traipsing off into somewhere else, but that's what happens when you allow us to play.
There is nowhere in particular that we are meant to be playing. We are just here where we are playing with whatever arises. Sophie and Bayo, I'm going to open it up in a moment for some questions. These questions may take us anywhere. So before we go there, I wondered if there's anything that either of you want to say to kind of close where we have been.
I just want to honor the bewilderment bio and say that my work for a long time has been in Gnostic, early folkloric Jesus, Rabbi Yeshua, before he becomes translated through into the very language, speaking of language of his oppressors and deracinated from his ecology and political context. And for me, what seems like a really interesting morsel that appears throughout the Gnostic text, and it's particular in the Gospel of Thomas, is a preoccupation with astonishment.
Beautiful.
Which is, the Gospel of Thomas, it says, first you seek, then you are troubled. When you are troubled, you will marvel. And so the entry point into a spiritual quest, into an interrogative participatory relationship with the sacred is being troubled and then reaching your marvel. And marvel, of course, is not being this kind of saccharine or pleasurable experience, but being through vertiginous, being about being spun, not knowing quite where you are. And so I do think that our birthright is this astonishment that I oftentimes think in my own life that I have a very impoverished narrative sensibility about my own life. I have a very impoverished idea about what possibilities are open. And I would like to open up space, like you were saying, like the 6 feet of space for something better to happen. And if I constantly am trying to close the distance and predict what happens, I will never leave that open space that attracts in something more interesting. And so I think marvel is that 6 feet of distance. It is that open space between people where something more interesting can happen. Yeah, marvel and bewilderment. Thank you.
That's a band name, by the way. Marvel and Bewilderment.
Yeah, I really felt moved by that description of the 6 feet of space. And as you traverse the world right now, there are just arrows everywhere telling you to stay away. You find it even on the path into a beach restaurant on the coast of Kenya. It will say, remember to socially distance, and these arrows are there. There is no part of this world that is without these arrows now. And yet I feel that many of us are here at this moment as things have opened up. You know, I'm in London right now, and I was observing yesterday, just it's back on it with a capital O-N, you know. And yet many of us feel that in this space where we've been called into a deeper place with ourselves, that now there is a process of understanding what has been shifted and what has died and what has come into being that was not there before, and then how to be in relationship with coming back out into a more loud, time-pressed, more people, more energies. I feel like that just gave us a kind of a different way of relating to it. So thank you for that. And if there's anything that comes up for you around how do we step in and embrace all that we've learned? You know, it's so easy in cultures that want you to forget to just go back to something that never served you in the first place. And so this kind of dance, as we find ourselves, you know, in these capitalist systems, having to do what we have to do, and yet we are changed.
I remember sharing this story with Manish. This was last year when we're in the thick. No, what year are we in? 2022. Okay, in 2020, 2 years ago, this Indian man from Kerala mounts an altar in response to the pandemic and in celebration or in worship of the Corona goddess. And it was in the newspapers, and it received just horrible responses because everyone felt, no, this is primitive. This is rubbish. We should focus on what the scientists are telling us. We shouldn't condone these kinds of primitive backwardness or something like that. That was the kind of response. That offers a glimpse, a studious glimpse into the reductionisms of our time, right? It's not just the reductionism of climate change to greenhouse gas emissions. It's the reductionism of the pandemic to this infinitesimally small critter, right? It's the virus. If we can get rid of the virus, we're home free. We're Scots free. And that's deeply troubling. That's problematic because it occludes the conditions that made these realities possible. It pushes them away and focuses on pixelation. And maybe in that sense, the virus is not just a virus. The virus is virus plus. It's virus and then ... It's virus and then an invitation to stay with the legacies of extractivism. It's a virus and an invitation to notice that the gods never left us behind, that they're hiding in furniture, in the ordinary, like James Hillman might say, that the archetypes are all around us. Modernity is the mythology of empty spaces, of the individual in some geometric Euclidean space where there's nothing else that is agential except me bumping into other beings that I must be invited to tolerate. So that's the invitation of our times, to not only see the 6 feet as epidemiological, but to probably see it as spiritual, to see it as the space for experimentation and play. In my writing, I call it Selah. Sophie, you would know about that Hebrew tradition. The jury is still out on what Selah means, but it's the idea of a pause when the conductor says, riff in the king's court, says, just play up a jazz number or do something, play with this moment. And I think playing with this moment, bringing in more than the political constituents that we're used to, I think is the invitation of our time, to stay with the invisible, be hospitable to monsters. Study is always fugitive. It was never contained or containable. So let's potluck, let's picnic, every time we gather together, that's a form of research. Sorry, Erin, study. Thank you, Sophie, beautiful.
So we have more questions. There are more people brave enough. We've got Ivan and Anasuya. I would like to bring your voices in. So let's have both of the questions. Ivan, you're already unmuted, it looks like. Would you like to jump in?
It's not a question, actually. It is the realization that the Bayo might be right in saying that language is non-human in the way we articulate the human to be. And I think the living proof of that today is that you guys are kind of weird, in a weird way, mediums of a form of telluric language that is today, showing up today, mobilizing emotions, and my heart is pounding. So it's just, that's the most probably honest remark that I can give. It's not even a question. By asking a question, I will be positioning myself as a self. It's just an invitation to thank you both for the generosity of your thinking and your experiences, and the realization that perhaps, language is something beyond symbols, and you are mobilizing it in ways that are making my heart pound big time. So thank you very much for that.
Ivan is in love.
Thank you, Ivan. Feeling that we can break free from some of the constraints of the spoken and written word in our expressions of our humanness. Anna Soya, would you like to ask your question?
Hello, Bayo. Hello, Sophie. It's so great to see both of you. Oh my goodness, this conversation has been amazing. So I just want to ask one question. Where is the space in that distance, in that space for the Kabbalah to come down? Where in that space of bewilderment that is the Black Madonna, the Earth Mother, that which is essential, that which gave life? Because for me, this is the space of her presence and of her beauty and her demand to return to her throne, return to the throne in our hearts and our consciousness. And one of the ways she's showing up is Earth's retaliation. One of the ways she's showing up is something that a virus that is getting us to stand still and go within. So if you can address that, that would be great.
Thank you, Anna. My parents studied the Black Madonna and visited all of her shrines and have written books about her. So this feels like very synchronous. I don't pretend to know quite as much as they do. For me, the feminine is more of a morphic field, as is the masculine, as are all the rhizomatic millionfold androgen other genders that flow between. They're patterns that we fall into, but those patterns leak and they overlap. And for me, the Black Madonna is multi-species. It is tentacular. It is Medusa's head with those snake tongues that are forking into and tasting all sorts of different time periods and geographies and experiences and umwelts, as Jacob von Uxel would say, sensory perceptions. So for me, the Black Madonna is inherently more than human, inherently multi-temporal, polytemporal, exploding, and invites us into that kind of, I think of Kali with the many arms and the many hands dancing, holding many different instruments, having a tool for everything. We can tap into her by practicing a kind of kaleidoscopic empathy, pouring ourselves, knowing that this exercise will fail, but trying to pour ourselves into other modes of consciousness. Thank you. Thank you.
And Anasuya, you kind of know what I'm going to say, but I'll say it. So the Yoruba people speak about Awon Yawa, which is this understanding that power is, in a sense, occultic. This is why I've never been able to subscribe or align myself with a notion of power that is squarely and exclusively premised upon recognition or the voice or the exercising of voice. Because I know that when I enter into a room back in my homelands, it's the ones that are quiet that are the most powerful. And the ones that are the most powerful and the most quiet are the mothers speaking behind the men that are gesticulating in the midst of the circle. Those are the ones that they call Awon Yawa or Aje. The Englishman came in and translated Aje as witch, yet another unfortunate description or translation. But this idea of Aje is so beautifully articulated by Sophie already. And I love your use of the word tentacular, rhizomatic, spread out, diasporic, that power cannot be contained, that the mother is matrixio, and her womb is everlasting, right? It breeds and it births all things, and it is also the site of death. So, but to be more practical, if one could speak about the practical in those ways, how do we make space for that? I don't think of space as the emptiness between bodies that needs to be filled, that needs some cumulative attention. I think of space as the querying of the presence of bodies, as the inflection of presence. That presence is never fully present. Presence is always conditioned, inhabited, instigated, supported by absence. This is what psychology learns to pathologize as sickness, as disease or dissociation or trauma and things like that. But a different cosmology thinks of those spaces, those openings, as possible invitations, not to be taken lightly, but always to be approached with risk for the new. That if we want to sit with Ajay, if we want to sit with Awan Yawa, if we want to touch into Black joy, where Blackness is not an identitarian concept, but the emergence and the murmuration of everything, even though I don't like to use the concept of everything because there's no easy umbrella concept that contains everything. If we want to sit with that power, especially in these times when the pillars that hold modernity are crumbling, then we need to go to those places of failure. The clue is in the darkness of it. The clue is in the spaces that we've learned to shield or push out or treat as impoverished. And this is why, to speak about education again, to a group of graduates last year in Pacific Graduate Institute, I in the commencement address, I said, what if success is a disability? What can you lean into right now if success, your success, the imaginaries of success are becoming complicit in supporting the Anthropocene? What does that do for us? So I feel Mother is waiting for us at the end of this virus, where I don't mean the end as the termination, but as the embrace of this virus in its complexity. I think Mother is waiting for us in the spaces of cracks, in the places of deep failure. I think Mother is waiting for us in places of deep communal disability, that we need generative incapacitation if we're to really sit with this trouble.
Yay! That was fabulous. That's exactly how I feel. Yay.
Thank you, Bayo and Sophie, and whoever that was, the enthusiastic voice that just came in. Sophie and Bayo, do you have anything that you want to share around work that you have coming up or programs you have coming up or ways that you want people to connect with you?
Thanks, Amisha. Thanks, Bayo. This has been the proper medicine, the proper pharmacon, the irritant that also adaptogenically ignites me back into liveliness. I have a book coming out. It's called The Flowering Wand, Rewilding the Sacred Masculine. I did not choose the subtext, Rewilding the Sacred Masculine. It was supposed to be trans-species magicians, rhizomatic harpists, lichenized lovers, and lunar kings heal the masculine. So just to put some context there, it's available for pre-order. And you can find me at Cosmogony on Instagram. You can find me at sophiestrand.substack.com. And that is how you can keep up with me. Thank you, everyone, so much.
Thank you. And Bayo, anything you would like to point us in the direction of?
I just feel I'm brimming with joy, the joy of actually being in conversation with everyone here, with your faces, your smiles, and with you, Amisha, but most especially with Sophie Strand. And so I have no desire to actually share any detail about me. I just want to say, go check out Sophie Strand and look forward to her book that is coming out. Sophie is one of the most powerful elocutors of our time and of this paradigm that is moving. Get to know her work, be dazzled by her speech and her power. And yes, I celebrate you, my sister.
The flourishing is mutual, as Robin Wall Kimmerer says, and it flows right back to you. Thank you for being part of the compost heap that made me who I am. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both of you. So you can find Sophie's website, sophiestrand.com, and you can find Bayo at bayoakomolafe.net. Thank you all so much for being here. And I can say that we have all really been very moved by this connection that you have, Bayo and Sophie, and to hear you two dialogue together as we explore this topic has really been a very beautiful experience for all of us. And so thank you very much for that. And you can find the podcast at allthatweare.org. Thank you. Thank you for listening and spending your time with us. As always, you can find links to everything we mention in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on allthatweare.org. We give space to our guests to share their perspective without debating it or fact-checking, as this approach allows for deep, unedited conversations from the heart. We trust your discernment and wisdom to take what is useful and challenge what isn't in your own understanding. We offer spaces for discussion and integration in our membership community. We hope that you have enjoyed this episode and it has sparked some inspiration and creativity in you. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible by you, our beautiful community. If you loved this and would like to connect more deeply with us, please join our membership. For less than a tea or coffee a day, you can access our community conversations and benefits such as our app and member gatherings, as well as being a patron whose support makes this podcast happen. Please also hit subscribe and leave us a review wherever you listen so others find us. All That We Are celebrates all that we are already and the untapped potential that lives inside us. It invites the full power of the more than human world, nature, the unseen, our ancestors and our future generations. It reminds us that we never exist in silo, through borders, timelines, or polarity, that in each and every moment, all that we are is here.